Hey everyone, I'm International Master Andrei Ostrovsky, originally from Ukraine, one of the best chess countries in the world. And today I come up with my very first live show for Chess24. And I'm going to discuss some interesting games from Danzhou Super Grandmaster Round Robin that takes place in China these days. We have already 5 rounds finished. And we have a sole leader. So it is not a Chinese player, it is a Russian player actually, Yan Nepomniachtchi, a top Russian grandmaster. And he leads with 4 points out of 5. A sole leader, full point ahead of runners-up. And by the way, imagine he has 4 points without draws. So he demonstrates a true fighting spirit and he deserves his first place at the moment, in my opinion. So let's go directly to chess content. A few seconds. I will show you the first game, which I think is interesting to discuss. And here we go. So there was the game between Nepomniachtchi and Ding Liren. It has started with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and d4, Scotch. Quite a typical opening choice for Nepomniachtchi. He plays Scotch quite frequently, so no surprises at this moment. Takes on d4, knight takes d4, bishop goes to c5. Another main line is knight f6. Knight takes c6 here, and queen f6 is considered as the main line. However, Ding Liren opted for b7 takes c6. Of course, taking with the d pawn is not serious because in that case, white just achieves a typical advantage based on the bad pawn structure on the queen side, having no concession made. So b takes c6 is one of the normal moves here. Bishop goes to d3, continuing development and preparing castling probably. And after d6, Nepomniachtchi played an interesting move h3, which according to my databases looks like already a novelty. So let's see several other examples to understand how it usually goes here in this opening line, to understand the spirit of the position. So the main line is castling, and after that it could go knight f6, knight c3, h6, knight a4, bishop goes to b6, b3, knight goes to g4. Pay attention to this move. Knight takes b6, pawn takes b6, so it looks like white is really fine because he has already a pair of bishops. Bishop b2, queen goes to h4, h3, and knight goes to e5. So as you can see, that is kind of typical maneuver here. Knight goes to g4 and then goes to the center on e5. Black controls somehow dark squares on the king side, exerts some pressure, and so on. That was a game between Danzhou and Torre. Nepomniachtchi himself usually chose queen e2 move in this position instead of h3 that he played in the game against Ding Liren. So let's see the game from 2014 when Nepomniachtchi played against Sargsyan. And here he played queen e2, trying to probably play bishop e3 in the nearest future. Because pay attention, bishop c5 is quite active here on this diagonal. It exerts pressure on f2. For example, if white castles short and then tries to play f4, it is not so easy to do. And even if white plays king h1 and then continues with the f4, it still weakens white's position. So bishop c5 is kind of annoying piece, so it looks like a natural idea to try to exchange it or to get rid of it somehow. So queen e2. Also, this move probably prepares castling long, so you never know. Queen e7, knight e2, knight f6, knight b3, attacking the bishop. After bishop b6, Nepomniachtchi played a4. And after a5, continued with the bishop e3. However, even after this exchange, black did not that bad. So white is better long term, of course, because white has a better pawn structure. However, black also has some dynamic possibilities. And again, knight goes to g4. So That proves that knight g4 followed by knight e5 is kind of typical idea here in this opening line. So after this, we can probably understand the idea behind move h3. So first of all, this move is kind of useful because it covers g4 square and prevents this typical maneuver of knight f6, knight g4, knight e5. That a bit limits black's choices, black's possibilities here. And since it is novelty, it is kind of psychological trick. So now black has to think himself over the board and to try to find a good plan. In the game, Ding Liren did quite well. So he played knight e7 instead of knight f6 because now, as you can see, after h3, there is no big sense in having the knight on f6. Probably it's better to have it on e7. Here it is more or less flexible. So black can think of undermining white's center with the help of f5 at some point. Also, there is a possibility to activate this knight through g6 square, which is also quite interesting and what actually happened in the game. So knight e7 is good. Knight goes to c3, knight goes to g6. As you can see, black tries to control key squares like e5, f4, maybe h4. So sometimes it might be useful, for example, to jump with the queen on h4, maybe with the knight on h4, exerting some pressure on white's king side, and so on. So here, Nippon Nishi opted for a very interesting idea, in my opinion. So he played knight a4, bothering the bishop c5. That is quite obvious. Why not? And after bishop goes to d4, because here it is possible, right? Why should black give up the bishop in so early stage of the game? So bishop d4, why not to save the bishop on the board? And here Nippon Nishi played c3, just attacking the bishop and forcing the bishop to f6 because, as I said before, black doesn't want to give up this bishop at the moment. So bishop goes to f6. And what happened? Actually, Nippon Nishi achieved his main goal, right? So he got rid of the bishop on this diagonal. So there is no longer a problem with this active bishop. So white is free to play f4 at almost any moment. Of course, after some preparation, because immediate f4 will lead to bishop h4 check, probably, and this will force white to lose the right to castle. However, after castling, white will be free to play f4 and grab the space on the king side and exert pressure in the center. However, this idea with knight a4 followed by c3 is a bit risky because of this knight on a4. So as you can see, it is placed on the edge of the board. It is completely limited with opponent's pawns, with white's pawns. So it literally has no moves. It is not a tactical risk, but there is a strategic risk. So you never know if you will have good possibilities to improve this knight in the future. It's not so clear at the moment. And black can also try to bother this knight, for example, after playing c5 and attacking this knight with the bishop. That actually happened in the game. So it was quite risky, but still quite interesting. So castles, knight goes to e5. As you can see, since white managed to control square f4 and is about to play f4, black should be in a hurry to improve his knight, because if knight stays on g6 and white plays f4, well, white will have very pleasant position. So knight goes to e5, bishop goes away. Of course, it is important to save light squared bishop on the board. Without that bishop, it will be almost impossible to achieve an advantage. Maybe position will be even worse. Castles, pawn goes to f4, that was planned, and knight goes to d7. So as you can see, black lost some time on this maneuvers of the knight. However, black is not worse at the moment. So the knight probably wants to occupy b6 square at some point. This knight still controls most critical squares like e5. And at first glance, it looks like it limits the ability of the bishop to be developed. But in fact, this c8 bishop has no good squares on the diagonal c8 h3, so it is about to occupy another position, maybe on b7, maybe on a6. It depends on what white will do. So knight d7 is quite good on in its position. So it is not very good, not very active, but it is not that passive as well. Queen goes to c2 to support pawn e4 and to support pawn c3, because at some point maybe white wants to play b4. Black plays c5, very natural move to prepare bishop b7. And after bishop f3, also a natural idea to improve the bishop's position, Black, in my opinion, came up with the wrong plan. So let's try to understand the idea, the main feature of this position. As we can see, at the moment, we don't have imbalances, material imbalances. So both sides have pair of bishops and knights and heavy pieces. From this point of view, position is equal. But what makes this position special is the pawn structure. So Black has a drawback. Since he took on c6 with the pawn, pawn a7 became isolated and potentially weak. Also, those doubled pawns c7 and c5 are not that great. When they start moving, they become usually worse and worse. Typical plan for white here is to prepare e4, e5. If white manages at some point to play e4, e5, that usually leads to positional disaster for Black. Because after e5, Black is literally forced to take on e5 with the d6 pawn, after which all those pawns c5, c7, and a7 become extremely weak. And white usually has no problems to attack them, since after e5, usually both d-file and e-file become open. So in addition to attacks with a help of minor pieces, white has great perspectives of attacking those weak pawns with the help of major pieces. That's the plan. So white wants to play e5. What Black can do to compensate the positional drawback of having this bad pawn structure on the queen side? Well, usually when you have a positional drawback like this, so static, long-term drawback, you have to compensate it with the active play of your pieces. So what Black can do? First of all, we can see that Black has two open files at the moment. They are e-file and b-file. So as for b-file, it is not so easy to get something beneficial out of playing over b-file, because b-file is protected heavily with the queen, with the bishop, with the knight, as you can see. So there is no direct object of attack on the b-file. However, it is different for the e-file, because here, as you can see, we have e4 pawn. And e4 pawn is dynamically strong because it has a chance to go further to e5 and to break Black's center and so on. However, it is also vulnerable. So Black has good chances to attack it. And that is exactly what Black does in such a pawn structure. Usually. So he tries to occupy e-file with heavy pieces to add, for example, the bishop on b7. He tries to control e5 to prevent e4, e5 move, and just tries to keep the tension. That's the plan, that's the idea. So in my opinion, in this position, it is better to start with the bishop b7 move. It is a normal development move, first of all, and what is really important, it is possible tactically. So, for example, immediate e5 doesn't work well here, because Black simply takes on f3. If rook takes on f3, for example, then Black simply captures on e5 and wins the pawn for no compensation. So if white wants to achieve something, he has to take on f6 instead. And at first glance, it looks like white benefits from this exchange, because bishop on f3 is hanging, and if the bishop goes away, white captures on g7, making Black's king's position quite vulnerable. However, in fact, after bishop c6, f takes g7 and rook e8, as you can see, king g8 is safe, right? So white has no real chances to attack it. White has an extra pawn at the moment, however, it is not a healthy pawn, so black has different resources to grab that pawn later. But what matters here is that rook now controls e-file. Especially square e3 is very important because white's bishop, as you can see, can't occupy this position. d2 is also prohibited because if bishop goes to d2, then rook jumps to e2, attacking g2. So g2 becomes really weak since bishop c6 attacks it directly. Black has different resources here. One of the natural plans is just to play queen f6 at some point, then to double rooks over e-file. One goes to e4, another one to e8, and finally to invade the second rank, after which g2 will be a simple prey. So this position can't be good for white. Actually, it is already better for black. So immediate e5 doesn't work here. What to do instead? So white should continue his development, I think, and let's see how it could be. For example, bishop goes to e3, natural move. Now rook goes to e8, just according to the plan, to exert pressure on e4. Now it is attacked twice, but at the same time it is protected twice, so this pawn is not hanging. However, as you can see, bishop on e3 is vulnerable, so for example, if queen goes to e7 next, it might be a problem. Just for instance, if rook goes to d1, already creating a threat of e5 probably, queen simply goes to e7, attacking e4 pawn, and then after e5, bishop simply takes on f3, and as you can see, white doesn't have a chance to take on f6, because bishop on e3 is hanging. So if white takes here, queen simply takes e3 with check, and black wins, taking rook next move, and so on. So after bishop f3, white is forced to capture with the pawn, after which black can simply take on e5, having an extra pawn again for no compensation. So after rook e8, rook d1 leads to queen e7. So instead, it is better to put the rook on e1 to protect the bishop. Then black continues with the bishop h4, for instance, trying to kick this rook away from e1 square. But after bishop f2, bishop c6, g3, bishop f6, white has a chance to prepare e5 with the help of queen d1, just protecting the bishop first, and now creating a threat of e5. But it appears that black is fine, simply playing queen e7, because if white plays e5, bishop takes on f3 first with the tempo, and after queen takes f3, it is possible to take on e5. Well, white has some pressure here, because black's pawns became weak, but after queen c6 and very solid move queen d6, looks like black is just fine. Another interesting possibility after bishop b7, to try to develop the bishop on a3 to exert pressure on c5 pawn, but without being vulnerable like on e3. So let's see how it works. So b3, for example, rook e8, bishop goes to a3. For example, rook goes to b8, protecting the bishop on b7. And after, let's say, e5, again, bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, pawn takes e5. Here, white has more possibilities to exert pressure, like if compared to the previous line that we discussed. But still, black is doing well. So queen goes to e7, rook goes to e3, rook goes to d8, queen e2, for example, e4, rook goes to e1, and yes, white manages to win e-pawn back, but if black reacts normally, for example, queen d6, rook e4 takes, and then probably even queen d2, something active, right? Because queen e8 is not a threat, we just capture on e8, and then knight goes to f8. So here, as you can see, black compensates positional drawbacks with the active counterplay of the pieces, just like we discussed. So it suits black's main plan. So bishop b7 was a good continuation and normal way to play. Instead, After bishop f3, black played rook b8. Well, it's not a mistake, but bishop b7 was just, in my opinion, was just better. So bishop e3 now, just developing the bishop. Bishop goes to a6, rook goes to d1. So now you can see the difference, because in case of bishop b7, bishop e3, and rook e8, white had no chance to play rook to d1. It is much more active position than on e1. In the view of queen e7, creating concrete threats over e-file. Here, after rook f to d1, black is just not in time to create counter threats over e-file. So white is fine. There is already a threat of e5 exists that forces queen to e7, and now bishop simply goes to f2. So as you can see, white managed to place his pieces in a very good way that suits white's plans. Bishop goes to b5, creating a concrete threat of bishop takes a4 and then rook takes b2. So Nepomniachtchi reacted with the rook to b1, simply protecting the pawn and maybe thinking of playing b4. Because it is also an interesting way to undermine black's pawns, creating some concrete targets to attack. Just imagine after b4, if black takes on b4 and white takes on b4 with his own pawn, a7 becomes vulnerable, c7 becomes vulnerable, and knights a4 achieves this c3 square to get back to the game and then finally to jump to the center. So b4 looks like a very natural plan here. So black understood the danger of this possible b4 and played knight to b6, trying to exchange finally this knight, which is potentially dangerous. That was probably a wise decision. Knight takes b6 and a7 takes b6. And here we can see another interesting change in the position. So at first glance, looks like black achieved everything he wanted, right? So first of all, he just simplified the position a bit, having a bit less space. It looks like a natural idea, so to make several exchanges. So one exchange was performed just on b6. After this exchange, as you can see, a7 pawn came to b6. Now it is protected with the c7 pawn. So black managed to get rid of one of his drawbacks, right? So there is no longer isolated a pawn. So there is only one drawback at first glance, doubled pawns c7 and c5. And again, at first glance, looks like black has no problems at all. In fact, position is not that simple. So we can see now that white has an interesting possibility to create a passed pawn on the queen side. So if white manages to start pushing his pawns like a4, b4, then sooner or later white will continue with a5 move, and this pawn might become very, very dangerous, since bishop on f3 controls this long diagonal, and white has a chance to open up this diagonal with the help of e4, e5 move. And you can see that bishop controls a8 square, the square of promotion of that pawn. So it might be extremely dangerous. This makes white's position very promising in a dynamic sense. Also, we can see there is no longer b file, which is open. So black's heavy pieces became less active. So you might say that, okay, a file is open now, right? So black can try to do something over a file. However, it's not true, again, due to the powerful bishop on f3. So at any moment, white can play e5, and a8 square is covered, is controlled. So black has no real chances to play over a file. Which means that black has only one e file for his major pieces. That makes black's position less interesting than before. So Nepomniachtchi continued with the rook e1 move. Now his plan is to combine ideas of e5, which still looks very promising, with the plan of creating a passed pawn on the queen side. So rook e1. Bishop goes to c4, b3. So as you can see, black tries to find a suitable position for light squared bishop. It is not so easy because bishop c6 loses on the spot in a view of e5 move. So c6 is not possible. So that's why bishop c4, trying to improve this bishop. b3, bishop goes to e6, now at least controlling the center and exerting some pressure on white's king side, but it's not serious, of course. And white plays a4. And that is exactly the first and maybe the last critical position in this game. So white is ready to proceed with his main plan, b4 and then a5 at some point, creating a very dangerous passed pawn on the queen side. Also, as you can see, white is about to play e5 almost at any moment. White has enough supporting pieces for this pawn push. Here, black should have been very, very careful and to estimate and to evaluate the position correctly. And black actually failed to do that. So the only possibility to prevent white's play that you will see will be very, very dangerous in the game. The only possibility to do that was to prevent bad consequences of the e4, e5 move. It was possible to do with the help of first g6. The idea is to have this square on g7 for the bishop. Let's say b4, and now bishop goes to g7, making e5 not that dangerous move. And also creating some interesting tactical possibilities connect with the temporal vulnerability of white's pawns. So after bishop went back to g7, now black has a chance to put his queen on f6 with the counterattack. That's the idea. And now let's see, for example, if white takes on c5, which was quite good in the game with the idea of creating a passed pawn in case b6 takes c5, and playing e5 trapping the bishop in case of d6 takes c5. Here, as you can see, it is not that dangerous because black can simply take with the d6 pawn. Bishop is already on g7, so e5 is possible, but it will be not that dangerous, right? Because bishop is not trapped, and okay, black achieves a possibility to play bishop f5, for example, and the most dangerous stuff is prevented, so white still has no passed pawn on the queen side. So after bishop g7, let's try to understand what happens if white continues with the a5, because it looks like the most logical continuation here to create a passed pawn. So black does exactly what he prepared. So queen goes to f6 with the counterattack, active counterplay. For instance, e5. Probably it is the only move if white wants to continue normally, because c3 is hanging, f4 is hanging. It's not possible to protect both pawns in one move. So e5 looks very promising since diagonal h1, a8 is now open. So white is about to play just a6, a7, winning some material. But it appears that black has enough counter chances. Queen takes on f4, and now after e5 takes d6, black has a good move, bishop to e5. It was actually possible if white opted for a6 move. The same, bishop takes on e5. Looks really good. So black has concrete threat. Queen goes to h2 check, then after king goes to f1, black continues the attack with the bishop c4 check, and then checkmate on h1, or something like that. Or to start with bishop c4, for example, and then queen goes to h2. This becomes really annoying. So it's better for white to sacrifice the exchange. Rook takes e5, queen takes e5. And now continue with the plan of a6, a7, trying to promote his passed pawn. It is not quite possible immediately since black controls d5 square, so at any case he can just close the diagonal with the help of bishop d5. So white starts with some maneuvers. First, he plays rook e1, attacking the queen and forcing queen takes d6. Now, rook goes to d1 with the tempo, and now white controls d5 square. And here black has two choices. So the first is just to play queen e7. However, after a6, creating a direct threat of a7, c6, preventing a7, bishop takes c6, pawn takes b4, pawn takes b4, and for example, queen takes b4, probably position is even dynamically. However, psychologically, it is much easier to play it with white. because white has a chance to win the material back at any moment, right? Just to play a7 and at least to regain the missing exchange. But at the same time, white has some interesting attacking chances on the king side, based on the weakness of dark squared complex. So black should be extremely careful here, because any momentary lapse of reason and white wins. So it's enough for white to occupy long diagonal with both queen and the bishop, and it will be over. At the same time, black should be careful about a7 move at any moment. It might be also quite dangerous. So this position is probably even, but from a practical point of view, I think white has a bit better chances. So bishop f5 with another interesting trick here, counterattacking the queen. And here, after queen b3, queen f4, a6, rook goes to e8, for example, b takes c5, black has an interesting counterplay based on bishop e4. Let's say bishop takes e4, rook takes e4, pawn takes b6, looks really dangerous, but black has a counterattack after rook e2. So this forces rook to f1, now pawn takes b6, queen takes b6, and again, the same situation. So white is in minor exchange, white is an exchange down, right? And at the same time, it's not so clear how black could improve his position, because black has to deal with the dangerous passed pawn on the queen side, and the same problem exists here on the king side. So the vulnerability of the king, the weakness of dark squares, and the potential threat of a checkmate in attack. So probably this position is also equal. Which means that g6 deserves serious attention. At least it was the best chance to stop white's quite straightforward plan of attack on the queen side, combined with the attack in the center. So just a prophylaxis to prepare for this e4, e5 move. So what happened in the game? After a4, Dinkleren played rook to d8. Quite a strange move in my opinion. Of course, white continued with the b4, straightforward move creating a threat of a5, and at the same time b4 takes c5. After bishop c4, Nepomniachtchi exactly took on c5, and here we can see a difference between g6 that I suggested and what happened here in the game. So now black is literally forced to take with the b6 pawn. Otherwise, if he takes with the d pawn, white continues with the e5. And that is the difference. If pawn is on g6, then it's possible, for example, to go back to g7. Here it is not possible, so the bishop is trapped. Bishop goes to h4, g3. Of course, black has a chance to play bishop d3, attacking the queen and grabbing the rook, but it's not enough. So queen goes to c1, bishop takes b1, queen takes b1, and bishop on h4 is still trapped, no moves. So best chance is to capture on g3, and after bishop takes g3, we can see that white has pair of powerful bishops compensating the rook completely, and of course being better than the rook. And also there is a dynamic plan, which is quite hard to stop. So that is f5, followed by e6, creating a passed pawn and just promoting it. For example, queen d7, attacking h3, but then simply f5. Let's say queen d3, trying to simplify a position and to win some material, but queen simply takes d3, rook takes, king goes to g2, and when rook takes on c3, just a6. White starts first and wins the game easily, because one bishop goes to c6, another one can take on c7 if necessary, and this pawn just goes to queen. Straightforward plan, and black can hardly do anything here to stop this attack. So after b takes c5, it is necessary to capture with the b6 pawn, after which we can see that a pawn already exists. It is a passed pawn, which is extremely dangerous. But what is really bad for black is that after rook b8 and rook b8, white continues with his main plan. It is e4, e5. Now it works perfectly because pawn e5 is invulnerable due to this great possibility of playing queen e4, just attacking e5 square and bishop on c4 simultaneously, winning the game immediately. So after d takes e5, f takes e5, black was forced to go away with the bishop, and white is much better. So you can see bishop controls this long diagonal. Pawn is about to start moving to a queen. Vulnerability of those pawns, c7 and c5, also became quite noticeable. So white has much more space, different options connected with, for example, queen e4 maneuver, attacking the bishop and trying to get to c6 square, which is also quite promising to occupy, just supporting the pawn and at the same time attacking black's weaknesses c7 and c5. This looks like a losing position. So in a game, Nepomniachtchi opted for a5. Actually, it was already possible to choose almost everything. For example, h4 was quite an interesting possibility, exploiting the fact that force rank is prohibited for black's bishop to occupy. Let's just see, for example, if bishop takes on h4, then after bishop takes, queen takes, rook goes to e4, attacking the queen and the bishop simultaneously. So here, of course, black has some counter chances. After queen g3, rook takes, check on e1, and then surprisingly rook to b6, creating a threat of check on h6 with a checkmate if white does nothing, but of course white has enough resources to prevent this counterplay. So just g3, rook h6, rook to h4, simplifying the position, and after this exchanges, okay, black can even take on e5, but this doesn't change anything. For example, after queen e5, queen goes to e4, creating a very nasty threat of queen a8 checkmate. If queen leaves the e file, then queen goes to e8 with the checkmate, for example. So black is forced to exchange queens, after which pawn a4 just promotes. No problems to win. So after h4, bishop is forced to a very ugly position on h6, and this looks like the game, but a bit improved. Because bishop is on h6 and not on g5. Actually, there is no big difference. However, still pleasant to force opponent's pieces to ugly positions. For example, here white can continue with the queen e4, and after, let's say, queen e6, bishop simply takes on c5, winning the first pawn in this game, but simply continuing with the same plan, just a5, trying to put the pawn on a6, maybe queen c6, simplifying position to the endgame, and then continuing with the promotion, maybe occupying the d file, also possible plan. There is also a direct threat of, for example, bishop g4 or something like that, and so on. So position should be easily winning for white. Another interesting possibility for black after h4 is to try bishop b3, an intermediate attack. But white simply goes to e4, and let's say after bishop d2, rook goes to b1. Just pinning the bishop, and appears that it is not so easy for black to get rid of this pin. For example, if bishop takes c3, then just queen d3, and after bishop d4, rook takes b3 again, winning the minor piece and winning the game. So in the game it was a5, which is also quite good. g6, queen goes to e4, queen goes to e6, bishop takes c5, so as you can see, pretty much the same. h5, bishop goes to d4, very solid position. Bishop is protected, at the same time e5 pawn is protected, so white's major pieces are free to maneuver over the board. Rook goes to b3, rook goes to a1, easily supporting the pawn, c5, and a6, a straightforward promotion of the pawn. So a7 is a threat, so black is forced to capture with the bishop, and now queen checks from a8. And here black made his final mistake, playing queen c8. However, even after the best, probably king g7, white has a chance to play bishop d5, for example, attacking the queen and the rook, then capturing that rook. And after cd4, queen a6, queen b3, and cd4, black can, of course, win pawn d4. But at the same time, white has an extra exchange, and this looks like a technically winning position for white. So it was anyway the best chance for black, and he missed it. After queen a8, he played queen c8, which at first glance looks just natural, but the problem here that white has just rook takes a6, and queen is hanging. If queen takes queen, then rook takes a8 check, and bishop d4 goes away, securing the extra minor piece. And if rook b8 attacking the queen, appears that white can ignore this threat and just go away with the bishop. After which rook a8 leads to easily winning position. So rook takes, regaining the queen, and white has an extra minor piece for no compensation. In the game after bishop f2, black played king g7, but after a few moves, white won, because after queen e4, all dangerous threats are prevented, so white is up material, and it is enough for winning the game. So that was the first game that Nepomniachtchi won in this tournament. As you can see, he came up with the novelty on the move number 7 already. However, probably it wasn't just a critical novelty. It was probably the way to a bit surprise his opponent, to force his opponent to act in a new territory. So at the same time, he prevented this typical maneuver knight f6, knight g4, probably just preventing black's main line connected with knight f6. And then continued in a very solid way, just getting rid of the bishop c5, just forcing that bishop to a passive position on f6, then creating some threats in the center, then changing the pawn structure and creating a threat of creating a passed pawn on the queen side. So he did everything to achieve maximum out of the given position. And his opponent just failed to recognize the danger and allowed him to achieve this great combination of a passed pawn on the queen side and e4, e5 possibility in the center. So what you should remember about this opening line is that long term, white is usually better because of the better pawn structure. White's main plan is to play e5 at some point when everything is prepared, to try to break black's central construction, after which black's pawns on the queen side become quite vulnerable. So black has to compensate this drawback with the active play of his pieces. And of course, to prevent white's main threats, like here. So the main threat was to play b4, a5, and e5, and black just failed to prevent it. That's why he lost. Let's get to another game. Another game played by Nepomniachtchi, this time with black pieces. So in the first game, he was quite solid. So he achieved very solid position with no risk to lose, actually. Slightly better from a practical point of view. Here we will see that Nepomniachtchi plays in a very aggressive way with black. And actually, Jan is famous for his aggressive style. He usually tries to play at his best, to try his best, no matter with which color he plays. And this game was placed in the round number 4 after Jan lost his previous game in the round number 3. So there was very principal moment because Jan wanted probably to regain his leadership and so on, to improve his situation, at least a psychological situation. Okay, so he played against Petr Leko, one of the greatest players of the past, I think. So he's still a great player, of course, but he's doing not that great like a couple of years ago, but he's still dangerous. So after e4, c5, knight f3, d6, Nepomniachtchi came up with Najdorf. After f3, e5, knight b3, bishop e6, bishop e3, bishop e7, queen d2, he played h5, one of the popular moves here. And Leka answered with the bishop e2. So initial idea of white's setup here is of course to castle long and to attack g4, h4, h5, g5 and so on. However, after black played h5, we can see that it is no longer so easy to arrange. Just for example, one of the recent games, white played castling long here in this position. After knight e7, king b1, rook c8 and queen e1, black simply continues his development and appears that black has no much problems here. So after h3, for example, he can play h4, blockading pawn g2, and the only active possibility is to play f4, after which black usually has no problems. So knight goes to h5, then takes on f4, occupies e5 square, so black is completely fine here, no problems. A bit more tricky way to play is to push pawn g2 to g3 to prevent h4, but still black continues in a very natural Sicilian way, just grabbing the space on the queen side and preparing minority attack, preparing knight c4, bishop c4 maneuvers, and it appears that black has no much problems. So for example, this game illustrates that black is just fine. So it's not so easy to come up with the attack actually on the king side, and positionally black is just better, having more flexible pawn structure and so on. That's why probably after h5 recently white started playing in a more positional way. So white castles short and tries to prove that h5 is a concession. So of course it's a kind of strange move for example normal knight with castling short, but looks like it is not a big concession, so black can afford playing this way. After knight d7, knight goes to d5, also a typical maneuver in Najdorf. Bishop takes on d5. So many players take with the knight and then push the bishop on f5, waiting for bishop d3 with the exchange. But it's mainly the matter of taste. So bishop takes d5. Also a possible continuation, so position remains closed for a long time, which means that white's pair of bishops will be not that dangerous. So e takes d5, castles, castles, and here the first critical moment. So this position is not that popular, and actually it gives only several games in the database, and one of them was played by Nepomniachtchi himself with black a few years ago. So he played the same move. He played then queen to b8, a very interesting multi-purpose idea. So what black wants to do? As you can see, bishop on e7 is quite passive, so it is a typical problem for Najdorf. However, after white captured on d5 with the pawn and d-file became closed, there is no longer a big problem with the d6 pawn. So when the pawn was on e4, it wasn't possible really to maneuver the bishop from e7 somewhere, because bishop is pinned to protecting d6 pawn. Here, after d-file is closed, it's possible to maneuver the bishop. And queen b8 prepares this typical maneuver. So black wants to do bishop to d8, followed by bishop to b6. Activating the bishop or exchanging this bishop for a much better one on e3. A clever idea, since white has some problems with dark squares here. So as you can see, majority of white's pawns is placed on light squares, which means dark squares are potentially quite vulnerable. So if black manages to exchange dark squared bishop, it will be quite easy to arrange an interesting play over dark squares later. At the same time, queen on b8 prepares b5 move. So it might be useful, for example, if white plays c4 at some point, just to undermine white's center with the help of b7, b5. So as you can see, queen b8 is quite a multi-purpose move. At the same time, bishop d8 is not only designed for bishop b6 idea. There is also a possibility to occupy e8 square with the rook to support very important point. It is e5, because one of white's plans, in addition to natural c4 followed by c5 probably, just grabbing the space on the queen side and trying to arrange a passed pawn. So f4, that is an additional idea. So to undermine black's central pawn e5, to try to open up position in the center and on the king side, and having pair of bishops to try to prove that, well, bishops are also pieces. So after queen b8, black prepares bishop d8 and rook to e8 to occupy the e file and to support additionally this extremely important e5 point. King goes to h1, bishop goes to d8, and Leko opted for f4 move immediately. However, in the initial game of Nepomniachtchi, where queen b8 arose for the first time in the history of chess, his opponent played c4 instead. And here, having no problems with the e5 square with the e5 pawn, black has the time to play bishop b6. And Nepomniachtchi exactly did that because it was the initial idea. Bishop takes b6, knight takes b6. His opponent played f4 here, but okay, Nepomniachtchi answered with the e4, keeping position closed and also achieving a passed pawn, which might be not that dangerous in the nearest future because this pawn will be easily blockaded. However, it might be a key factor in the endgame. So knight goes to d4, queen goes to c8, also normal move, controlling f5 square, preventing knight f5 and also exerting pressure on c4. Rook c1, rook goes to e8, b4, queen goes to d7. So as you can see, white has no chance to play immediate c5 move because d5 pawn is heading. So it's not so easy. And also white has no real chances on the king side at the moment. So to play f5, well, it's probably possible, but then rook goes to e5 and controls everything there. Also, white should be ready for e3 at some point, just pushing the pawn further and freeing e4 square for the rook or for the knight. Might be dangerous. So here white decided to improve knight's position. So knight goes to c2, preventing e3 and being ready to occupy very good blockading square on e3, from where the knight will support d5 pawn, making c4, c5 possible. So here Nepomniachtchi had a great possibility to grab the initiative. It was possible to play a5 here. The point is that if white protects his pawn on b4, trying to save this flexibility on the queen side, black just captures on b4, and after taking on b4, rook goes to a2. So as you can see, it became possible after white played knight to c2. So rook just invades, and now black has different attacking possibilities on the queen side. So rook from e8 can support rook a2 from a8. For example, queen can jump to a4, also creating pressure. So attacking the knight c2, attacking pawn b4, and so on. So this looks like a promising position, and it's not so easy for white to regroup his pieces because rook, as you can see, controls the second rank. There is the bishop on e2, so even if queen goes away somewhere from the d2, then it's not possible to improve knight's position because bishop is hidden. So of course, it is probably possible to improve white's position here, but it takes time. And since it takes time, black also has the time to make active moves like queen a4, rook a8, creating concrete threats. c4 is also an interesting object to attack, for example, the help of rook c8 move, and so on. So black has a good counterplay here. So after a5, it is probably better to take on a5. This looks like a move that wins a pawn. However, after knight a4, rook b1, and knight to c5, black achieves something more than material balance. It is occupying very good and typical position with the knight It is on c5 supported by pawn on d6. As you can see, there are no pawns on adjacent files, so it's not possible to bother this knight. So this knight here forever, maybe. Well, this pawn structure is long-term much better for black. So black will continue with the very straightforward plan, I guess. Just playing rook to a7, another rook to a8, then probably queen c7 or queen d8 if necessary, so concentrating all the power against a5 pawn, then winning it back, and then continuing with the attack against a2. And also pay attention to this poor bishop on e2. So it is limited with own pawns, it is limited with black's pawns, e4 and h5, and it is really passive. So in such a situation, knights usually dominate bishops. So that was an interesting plan, a5. So as you can see, in that game, Nepomniachtchi failed to do that, to find this possibility, or maybe he underestimated his resources, who knows. However, 100% that he analyzed it afterwards and was ready to perform it in the game against Leko. And Leko, of course, was also prepared for this scenario and decided to try to improve the play against this line and played f4 immediately. And that is a difference because now playing e4 is probably a bit risky because bishop is still on the board. It's not clear if it will be exchanged soon. So after e4, this bishop might be activated through d4 and so on. Instead, Nepomniachtchi continued with the rook to e8 move, which is also planned because after bishop d8 it is possible to support e5 with the rook. And now Leko played c4. And again, there is a big difference if compared to the earlier game of Nepomniachtchi. So if now black continues with the same plan, I mean bishop to b6, trying to exchange bishops, white simply captures on b6, knight takes on b6. As you can see, pawn on f4 is all ready, so white has a chance to capture on e5 now. And after rook e5, white opts for a typical exchange sacrifice. So rook takes f6, damaging black's pawn structure on the king side completely. And after g takes f6, and for instance bishop to d3, white is better because white has much better pieces. Knight goes to d4 very soon, rook goes to f1, then it depends. So it's possible to continue with the attack, for example, occupying h6 square with the queen. It's possible to occupy f5, for example, with the knight, and then also maneuvering the queen somewhere to the g file. It's possible to attack h5 pawn, it's possible to attack this pawn, and so many different objects of attack. And black's rooks that are still not activated, black's major pieces in general are not activated yet, and there are no chances to play for win with black in such a position. I think that white is better and white has good chances to win. So that was a threat, and maybe that was the main intention. And that's why instead of playing bishop b6, Nepomniachtchi tried something different and quite good. He played b5. That was another idea behind playing queen b8, and it happened that it was possible to perform. What is the main feature of this position now? As you can see, white has no chances to save the pawn on c4 somehow, so it will be exchanged on c4 or maybe on b5, doesn't really matter. The point here is that once pawn c4 goes away somewhere, d5 becomes a weakness. Well, at first it becomes a vulnerability, and then it becomes a weakness very, very soon. So black's main idea is to counter attack, and as you can see, black's queen is just in the right position here to start this attack very soon. So queen can go to b7, for example, and attack d5 pawn. That's a very interesting plan. Pawn takes e5. knight takes e5, of course, so black has to activate his minor pieces here, and knight takes e5 is a typical recapture. So now this knight is very good in many senses, in many ways. So it controls most important squares. It controls, for example, c4 square, d3 square, f3, and g4. c4 is the object of attack and potential outpost for the knight. Just for example, after c takes b5, a takes b5, it is a typical idea to occupy c4 square in Sicilian and in Najdorf particularly. g4 is also an interesting and tempting square to occupy in many lines, just starting the attack on the king side, because as you can see, after f pawn went away, white's king position here is a bit vulnerable. So at the same time, this knight creates a natural barrier on the way of white rooks, for example. Just imagine if it is possible to play bishop d4, then to go with the bishop e2 somewhere, and then to try to double rooks over e-file. Okay, there is the knight on e5 to cover everything. So that is a great piece. Pawn takes on b5 because it was more or less forced. Pawn on c4 was hanging, so a takes on b5, and knight goes to d4. Just in time to start on play, because after b7, b5, as you can see, black also made a concession. So c6 square is weak and maybe tempting to occupy with the knight d4. Pawn b5 itself is quite vulnerable, so white can attack it and maybe even win it. And also, another idea behind playing knight d4 usually in such a situation is to put the knight on f5. Here it is even more tempting because black played h5, which means that playing g6 is usually not that great, right? Because it weakens king's position a lot. So when the pawn is on h7, well, g6 is more or less possible almost at any time. After h5, well, it's debating. So you have to be very careful and check twice before making such a move like g6. So knight on d4 wants to occupy f5, c6, and at the same time creates pressure against b5, which is weak itself. For example, d5 pawn is not hanging, because if knight takes on d5, bishop simply takes on b5, knight takes e3, as you can see, capturing the bishop and attacking the rook at the same time. So queen takes e3, and let's say rook f8, which looks like the most normal square after all, because e7 leads to knight f5 with the tempo. Right, so rook goes to f8, white simply continues with the a4, and well, in this position, white should be a bit better, since white's pawn structure is better, is more flexible, and white has potentially very dangerous tandem on the queen side. Well, at the same time, we have bishops of opposing colors, so that makes white's movement on the queen side not that simple. However, well, we still have a lot of other pieces on the board, so it doesn't really matter at the moment. So here white is better. Instead, of course, Nepomniachtchi came up with the knight c4. Much better move than taking on d5. So the first, he has to get rid of white's light squared bishop. Now we can see that white no longer has pair of bishops, good achievement. And also we can see that black managed to improve his pawn structure, because now pawn is on c4. Well, it is vulnerable, but it is not that weak like on b5, because it is not so easy to attack. At the same time, b file is now open, so queen on b8 starts working directly from initial position here, right? So it's no longer necessary to improve queen's position, so b2 is under attack already. If queen moves away somewhere, black can capture it in many variations and many lines. At the same time, d5 is still a problem. So at any moment, black can add additional attackers to capture that d5. So it's possible to attack d5 with the help of rook a5 move, just like this, right? It's possible to attack this pawn with the help of queen b7. It's possible to attack this pawn with the help of rook e5 at some point, of course not immediately because of knight c6 fork, but in the future, right? So there are so many different ways to attack d5 pawn. And white is in trouble here. Not necessarily in a big trouble, but well, position is already not that pleasant to play. The best way to react here was to counterattack on the king side, because it looks like the most vulnerable area in black's position. Everything else just perfectly protected, and black's pieces, despite looking not that active at the moment, in fact very good coordinated. So it's not easy to break through on the queen side, for instance. It's not even possible to break through in the center, and so the king side was the only possible target to attack, especially g7 square and the king side in general. Sorry, the king position in general, because it is weakened a bit with the help of h5, right? Due to h5, not with the help of. So knight f5 was the best move here. Few words about other possibilities. For example, knight c6 also looks like a natural idea, right? To occupy a weakened square with the temple and so on. But in fact, it appears just to help, because queen goes to the active position b5, already attacking d5 pawn twice. Now white has nothing better than to capture the bishop. Okay, rook takes on d8, and appears white has no suitable defense of the d5 pawn. Just for example, if bishop goes to g5, pinning the knight f6, right? Knight jumps to e4, attacking the queen, and after queen f4, just f6, attacking the bishop, preventing queen takes f7, and next move black will capture in d5, having an extra pawn for nothing. At the same time, after bishop h4, white should be ready for g5, for example, with the fork. So bishop d4 is also not a move in view of the same knight e4. Attacking the queen first, moving away the knight from this potential capture, and after queen f4, queen takes d5, protecting everything and winning the pawn at the same time. Again, material advantage, very close to win. So after rook a takes on d8, white is in trouble. White has to do something, white has to find something, and the only possibility, the only chance probably to capture on f6, to sacrifice an exchange. However, if compared to the line that we discussed on the move number 15, when white also sacrificed an exchange, here we have a big difference. So first of all, white has less resources to attack. At the same time, black's pieces are much more active and much better coordinated. And in addition, white has much more weaknesses in his position if compared to that position on the move number 15. So here black plays for a win and actually has great chances to do that. So bishop d4, probably the only way for white to continue to proceed is to try to create a tandem of the bishop and the queen against black's vulnerable king. Queen takes d5, queen goes to f2, creating a threat of queen takes f6. And here black has a great calm move, rook to a8, just to improve in the position of the rook and simply ignoring white's threat of capturing on f6. Why? Because after queen f6, it's possible to play king f8. And appears white has no real attack, since queen g7 leads to nowhere after king e7. And king simply goes to d7, where it will be much more safe than on the king side, being covered with own pieces. And as you can see, this powerful queen on d5 not only attacks, not only exerts some pressure, it also occupies very good defensive position. So it literally protects all the pawns that white might attack. So here white has no chances. Bishop f6 is a bit more tricky. here instead of queen f6, creating sort of going away with the bishop probably somewhere, maybe some checks over g file and so on. But queen goes to d3, again, very natural move, improving position of the queen, creating a threat of rook 8 e2 at some point, and at the same time controlling g3 square, so preventing queen g3 check, and at some point having a possibility to cover the king with the help of queen g6 or queen h7 or something like that. So after queen d3, bishop goes back to c3, again trying to occupy f6 probably. Black has a good continuation. Rook takes a4 using the vulnerability of the back rank. So if rook takes, then checkmate, of course. Well, maybe not a checkmate, right? So after rook takes a4, there is no checkmate in the view of queen g1. But okay, after queen d1, queen g1, we just capture rook on a4, winning it back and simplifying position to a maximum, after which white has no real chances to survive. So after rook a4, it is necessary to occupy this position with the rook, and it looks a bit dangerous at first glance. So f7 is hanging, not so easy to defend it actively. However, in fact, black has this perfect move f5, and this move secures black's great chances to win. If queen takes f5, then queen takes, rook takes, and checkmate on the back rank finally. So f5 is invulnerable here, and this means black has good chances. So rook can be improved. Rook a4, I mean, somehow probably it's better to place this rook somewhere on f7 to cover everything, and maybe intending to play f4, f3 in the future, opening white's king position. Probably it's possible to put this rook on the e file. For example, it's possible to play d5 and then maneuver that rook through a6 to e6, or maybe on g6, also an interesting position, protecting on king and also attacking g2 square, g2 pawn, and so on. So black is completely fine here, fighting for a win. So knight c6, as you can see, is not good. Instead, much better was knight f5. So knight f5 is a good move, because white is not passive. White tries to be very active on the king side, trying to create concrete threats to the king. And we can see that in some lines it might be really dangerous. So knight e4 looks like a logical idea to improve the position of minor pieces and at the same time to protect most vulnerable squares on the king side. Queen goes to e2, now bishop goes to f6, just in time to prevent some sacrifices. And of course bishop d4, which looks really nasty threat to attack g7. So bishop goes to f6. Now we can see that b2 is attacked directly. White continues with the queen h5. Only chance for white is to be as much active as it possible on the king side. Queen takes b2 now. Rook goes to b1. And here we can see the first trap. For example, if queen goes to a2, capturing the pawn blindly, rook simply jumps to b7. Now you can see f7 is under attack. Rook f8 is forced. Black has no better defense, so rook goes to f8, and now bishop goes to d4, creating a couple of really annoying threats. So the main one is, of course, to capture the bishop, and then after knight takes on f6, knight goes to e7 with the checkmate. That's why bishop is invulnerable on d4, so black has no time for capturing that bishop. Knight goes to e7 with the checkmate. At the same time, there are some threats connected with simple knight h6 or knight g7, or simple queen g4 attacking g7, and so on. So it looks like g6 is the only move here to prevent everything. Queen goes to h6 then. Again, there are two threats: to capture on f6, followed by knight e7 checkmate and queen g7 checkmate. Black has to take on f5. And then bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, queen g5 check, king goes to h7, queen f5 check, everything is forced, king g8, one more check, and then queen takes f6, and pawn f7 is hanging. Of course we have even material now, but white's pieces are much more active, and white should win quite easily in a few moves because it's not possible to protect everything. So as you can see, queen is completely out of play on a2 and can't help other pieces to protect. Pawns f7, d6, for example, and the king, which is the main problem now. So after rook a to b1, it's possible to play queen c2 instead. Here queen is a bit better, and now you will see why. So rook b7, everything goes the same way. Rook f8, again bishop d4, a good attacking continuation. But now, as you can see, there is a difference because black has a chance to capture on a2 with the rook, creating a counter threat to g2, a checkmate, which is also very, very dangerous. So queen goes to g4, looks like a logical idea to protect g2 and at the same time to create a threat to g7 point. So here black hopefully has this knight f2. Bishop takes f2 and queen takes f2. So black exploits the vulnerability of the first rank. If rook takes, then okay, rook a1 with the checkmate. So here, for example, if white plays rook to g1, queen goes to e2, and appears white has no serious threats. So after queen f4, queen goes to h5, another great attacking continuation preparing bishop to e5. Now it's possible since queen covers h5, so there is no danger from knight e7 followed by check on h5, for example, with the checkmate. So after queen h5, it's possible to move the bishop, and bishop moves to e5 with the great efficiency. So for example, queen takes c4, bishop e5 attacking h2. The only move here is h4, because if g3, then checkmate immediately on h2. If knight g3, we can capture that knight because pawn h2 is pinned. If h3, finally, black has very nice move, queen takes h3. So if pawn takes, then rook goes to h2 with the checkmate. So h4 is the only move here. And black continues with the rook f2, attacking the knight. By the way, rook was hanging on a2, that's why probably it's not a very good idea to capture the knight. So rook f2 first, attacking the knight, and when the knight goes away somewhere, black has a winning idea of rook f4 and then capture on h4 with a decisive attack. So rook g1 here will be a mistake, and hopefully, again, white has the only way to save the game. It is knight h6 check. Now it's necessary for black to go to the corner since king h7 loses on the spot. Queen goes to e4 with check, and then after, let's say, king h6, white can capture the queen, since rook a1 leads to nothing in the view of rook b1. So you can see queen controls b1 square and white wins. So after that, king should go to h8, and white has a perpetual. After knight f7, king g8, knight h6, and knight f7. So it could be a draw. Of course, it is not the only way of how game could have continued after knight f5. Surely, but this just shows the potential danger from this maneuver. So knight f5 followed by bishop d4 and followed by queen to g5 at some point. It could be quite dangerous attack on the king side, and it was white's best chance actually. Instead, Leko played bishop g1. Passive move, and a bit hard to explain why he chose exactly this variation. So now black's pieces become extremely active. So queen b7 first, attacking d5 and preventing knight c6 with the tempo. Now, for example, if knight goes to c6, then simply knight e4, knight takes d8, rook takes d8, queen d4, rook goes to c8, protecting everything, and after rook c1, rook goes to c5. And d5 drops sooner or later. So black will have a great centralization after that. So after queen c4 and queen takes b2. And in addition to that centralization, black has an extra pawn, which is also quite pleasant. So after queen b7, Leko probably understood that his position is no longer so good and played queen c2, But this doesn't change the situation. Knight jumps to e4, so black starts activate all the pieces and centralize them. d5 is permanently weak. That makes white's position really annoying. After knight c6, for example, here, black has bishop f6 attack on b2, and for example, rook a b1 is complicated because a2 is hanging. So maybe the only way to protect that pawn is to play this rook to b1, but then queen b5. And white has no satisfactory defense against queen d5. So rook goes to e1. That happened in the game. Queen takes d5. Rook goes to f5. Leko tries to counterattack. Rook b5. But it appears not enough. So rook h5 was possible here to capture the pawn. At first glance possible. In fact, after rook a2, black has a great position. So queen takes c4, rook takes b2, for example, knight f3, and simply rook b1. So, okay, black has an extra pawn and good chances to win. The point here that after rook h5, at first glance, looks like black simply wins after knight g3, but this appears a decisive mistake. So after knight g3, pawn takes, rook takes, queen h7 check, and king f8, white has a decisive knight f5 move, after which he wins. So decisive attack, not possible to save the game with black here. Rook b5 was played in the game. Queen went to e7, creating a real threat of knight g3. Just for example, if rook takes h5, then knight f2. Okay, not knight g3, but okay, a threat of discovered attack with the help of knight's check. So knight g3 is still not good in the view of the same, but here knight f2 is possible. Great difference. It is check, and if bishop takes, queen takes on e1. It's not possible to capture with the bishop in the view of a checkmate, and after bishop g1, black has the time to prevent queen h7 check, simply playing g6. So after queen e7, it's necessary to do something with the hanging rook on e1. And obviously it's necessary to go away from the e file, which is quite good for black and really annoying for white. Leko decided to occupy f file, which appeared not that efficient in general, and also this prevented, for example, queen capture on c4 in the view of knight d2 fork. So probably the most tested move was rook to d1, creating a real threat of capturing on c4 and regaining the material. But here black has plenty of different ways to continue. One of them is just to sacrifice this pawn this way, and after b takes c3 and, for example, g6, black has a clear advantage because black has much more coordinated pieces. First of all, black has this enormously active and dangerous knight on e4, controlling almost everything around. And also black has a better pawn structure, since white has this vulnerable pawns on the queen side. Black has no problems with attacking them somehow. So c file is open, a file is open, so plenty of different options. I guess black has an advantage here, clear advantage. So after queen e7, white played rook to f1. And since c4 is not hanging, black has the time for some prophylaxis. And here he played g6, very natural move at the moment, because f5 square was a critical one. For example, if knight goes there, we already saw how dangerous it could be. So g6 just prevents knight f5, after which all white's counterplay becomes not that dangerous if possible. Knight goes to f3 happened in the game because queen c4 just loses the exchange. However, it is still not that simple. For example, if queen c4 knight d2, looks like white has queen c4 move. But okay, in this case we capture on f1. Okay, white regains the material, but here black has a brilliant move, knight takes h2. Yeah, really surprising, and white has no satisfactory move to respond. Because if bishop takes, well, if king takes first, then queen h4 checkmate immediately. If bishop takes on h2, then checkmate in 4. Bishop here, maybe not in 4, but it doesn't matter. So bishop here, and rook goes to e1 with a checkmate. So knight is invulnerable on h2, and this means next move, knight goes to g4, and in addition to extra material, black has great chances to attack directly on the king side. So this position is completely lost. Leko played knight f3 here, and after queen e6, Nepomniachtchi came up with a better position. Material is even at the moment. However, black has much better coordinated pieces, this active knight, and much better centralization. So centralization means a lot, especially here. Leko played a4 and h4. Another interesting dynamic idea. So since white can't prevent h3 with the help of on h3, for obvious reason, because of knight g3, black can weaken white's position on the king side easily. Knight goes to d4, queen goes to d7, queen takes c4, and h3. Let's go. So now inevitably white's king becomes extremely vulnerable, and Nepomniachtchi just converted this advantage quite convincingly. For example, if white takes on h3, black has a surprising and very powerful way to win, knight g3 check, making white's king completely weak. So takes on g3, and now rook takes a4, another great sacrifice. So as you can see, black wants to do what? To take on h3, forcing bishop h2, and then to take on f1, but this rook is protected by the queen. So rook takes on a4, deflecting the queen. The best way to play for white is to take on f7 probably, because after, let's say, queen a4, black wins easily, takes, check, one more check, rook e1, checkmate. If queen goes to d3 instead, then takes, bishop h2, and one more deflection, rook takes d4, again wins. So queen f7 looks like the only possibility. And then after queen f7, rook f7, king f7, as you can see, black finishes with the extra exchange and great chances to win. So clear advantage as well. So pawn on h3 is invulnerable, which is quite annoying, because next move will be h3 takes g2. So after rook f4, Nepomniachtchi started with the knight c5, an intermediate move, also attacking a4 pawn, which is quite unpleasant for white to meet. Leko played b3, after which he captured on g2, king g2, and after rook c8 and queen f1, just see what happens. Black starts activating all the pieces one by one. Every move is a tempo move, and white has no defense. As I said before, black has a much better centralization. It means a lot. It means that black has a much better mobility, and in case of changing the direction of the game, changing the situation of the board, black is ready much better than white to react. And here, bishop g5, first move, activating the bishop and attacking the rook. Knight goes back to e4 to the center, closer to the king. That is a natural object of attack for black now, since black managed to open up a position there. Rook goes to d3, queen g4 check. King goes away, rook to c1, another powerful move. So move by move, no chances. Queen g2, queen h4, creating a threat of knight to f2, using the pin. Rook goes to f3, the only defense, but now bishop e3, another powerful move. Just a technical paradise here. If rook takes, then simply knight to f2, winning material and winning the game. Winning the queen first and then winning the game. So it's not possible to capture the bishop. Knight e2 was played in the game by Leko, but this doesn't change the situation. Knight goes to f2, rook takes, bishop takes, knight takes c1, and bishop takes g1. And again, that is really surprising, but bishop is invulnerable. If king takes, then rook e1, winning the queen. If queen takes, then the same. Simply rook to e1, winning the queen. So queen g3, but queen d4. White's king is deadly weak, so it's not possible to save the game. Queen takes g1 finally, but then queen d2. Rook goes to e1 inevitably. The only chance to prevent it for a while is to play knight d3, but okay, queen takes, rook goes to g5, and rook goes to e2. And here Lecker resigned, because, well, one of the threats is to play queen e4, followed by rook e1. Another threat is to take on b3 first, and then to do the same, and so on. So white has no real defense. There is a big difference in position of kings. Despite even material, black's king is safe, white's king is completely weak. So white has no chances to survive it. Okay, so it looks like we have to finish with this. So I intended actually to show you one more game, but maybe next time. A few words to finish this broadcast. I hope that it was useful, it was interesting, entertaining, and what is more importantly, instructive. So we discussed some typical ideas of concrete positions, of concrete variations, for better understanding about the future. I'm going to create my own weekly show. Hopefully the first episode will be presented next Tuesday at the same time. Starting time is 7 p.m. By Central European time zone. Also, I will come up with Banter Blitz shows time after time. I think it will be interesting for you to challenge me, for example, because currently I'm rated 2900s. So top 20 of Chess24 Blitz players, not that bad actually, I guess. So see you next shows, and have a nice evening. Bye.